Good evening and welcome to Homeless No More. Let's learn, let's talk, and let's respond. I'm Amanda Hazlitt. My day job is being the Community Engagement and Host Home Coordinator with the Portal Outreach Association. However, this evening, I'm your host. On behalf of the Homeless No More event team, I would like to welcome you. We are excited for you to join us, whether you are tuning in online or here in person. This evening's event will start with a premiere of our documentary, which is about the lived experience of homeless youth in our community. This will be followed by a panel discussion with a Q&A period following that. For those of you at home, you can add your questions to the YouTube chat area, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. We will conclude with how you as members of the community can join us as we pursue a homeless no more Annapolis Valley. We have a busy evening, so let's get right to it.
Like I was dying inside, and just the will to survive, and that I can have, you want a normal life so bad, but it just seems like no matter what you do, you can never be normal, and I just wanted to have a normal life. When I was 14 or 15, I started becoming really obsessed with my physical fitness and martial arts and stuff, and I practice martial arts, Wing Chun, at least 6 to 8 hours a day. I was just obsessed. I was obsessed with Bruce Lee at the time, and it was almost like I worked myself into mental illness. It was really scary, and I struggled with that, and I was on and off medication, and every time I went off my medication it would get worse. I stayed on the medication for a while and it helped, and I decided to go off again because my physical health, my martial arts and stuff wasn't doing so well with the medication in my eyes at the time. And I ended up going completely psychotic and thinking I was God or Jesus, and I stole from a store, got arrested. I spent some time in forensics and had a whole range of delusions, thinking I might be a werewolf or the Antichrist, or it was just craziness. And I mean, me realizing that was the first step to true recovery. So here I am on a good medication. I think it's good. I like it. So that's important.
The thing with spending time with Lucas, it was always some precious moments, because he really valued spending time together, and he really valued, some listening and some talking, and when he was on his medication, it was fairly what you would call normal, and there was times that he was off his medication and he would be talking about very fanciful or out there kind of things that would freak a lot of people out. But if you've had any experience or the young person, it's not so scary. The nice thing is we could bounce things off Glenn Berry, who's a psychologist, or Scott, and we could say to them, hey, should we encourage this? Should we discourage it? Should we just go with the flow? And they were able to coach us through a lot of that stuff when there was a struggle with mental health. And so that was really great. So yeah, he would love to get in the car and go for a drive, whether it was out to his mom's place, which was like 30 minutes away, or whether it was in town to grab a coffee. There was a number of people he could connect with and spend that time with, and that was really important to him.
I left the refuge after kicking Jacob, and I went to the marsh and I grabbed a stick, and I thought, at the time I thought I was infected with worms, so I tried to channel all the power from the negative energy from my body into the stick. And so I walked around town with a stick, and I thought I was taking negative energy from people and healing them. So I walked around town with the stick and tried to heal people. And I came back to the refuge because I wanted to heal Jacob after kicking him, and the police showed up and told me I couldn't come back there, and they said they were either going to take me up to the hospital or I had to leave. And I didn't want to go to the hospital, so I decided to go back to the marsh.
Yeah, and this is where we could come up and visit you until you're ready to come back to the refuge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Scott and Glenn were consistent through that time because they could work with you here or at Valley Regional.
Yeah.
And also at the refuge, right?
Yeah, it was here when I actually came to the conclusion where I decided I couldn't smoke weed anymore.
Oh, that's where you realized it was not helping your situation.
Yeah, because I hadn't smoked any while I was in the hospital, and I recovered a bit. And I decided, I'll try a puff, and I had a couple puffs out back here with my buddy Ryan, who was also in the Beacon House. And it really freaked me out. Like I heard chainsaws and stuff, and I thought people were coming to kill me. So it's like, no, I'm not gonna smoke that anymore.
So, in your own understanding,
yeah,
when you were using marijuana to help you, you thought it was actually hindering you. It was affecting your medication, affecting your mental health and things like that.
Yeah, I think I was too sick at the time before to realize that's what it was.
Yeah.
I thought the world was just changing. So.
Right.
When you're in there, they don't really tell you much about what's going to go on with your...
Right.
What they're planning to do with you. So you're kind of there wondering what's going on and what's going to happen, and then they make changes and you're not aware about it. They just come to you with a new medication. You're like, what's this? I don't want to take it, sort of thing, right?
So when Dr. Mulhall can explain things and why they're trying things that they're trying or what the treatment might look like, that helps you?
Yeah, it did, yeah.
Oh my. He was a bit of a challenge. Let's put it that way. When he was younger, he was diagnosed with ADHD. Before he moved out, there was like some things going on with him, with his psychosis and stuff, which I didn't really know much about. I do remember going out one time with some friends of mine. I come home, and here he is, like, boiling his clothes on top of the stove. He just felt like he had some issues where he felt like there was things in his clothes, like bugs or something, right? And the more I tried to tell him, like, no, they're okay, you're okay, but the more it wasn't okay for him. And it's like, for me, how do I go about trying to help him when I've never experienced anything like that before, right? And there wasn't a whole lot of information for me of how to deal with it, and it escalated, got to the point where you gotta go because, I'm gonna lose it on the thing, right? It was very hard for him and for me, right? It wasn't a decision that I made lightly by any means. I mean, they're your children, and you don't really want to do that. But sometimes it comes down to that. If you're in a situation where it could escalate and get a lot worse, but sometimes you have to just, let them go and try to figure things out. But, because when you're not totally understanding what he's going through mentally, it's just really different. So.
We work with mostly with people with more severe mental illnesses, so schizophrenia, psychosis, other kinds of thought disorder. and sometimes bipolar disorder as well, and some other major illnesses from time to time. But these tend to hit a person in their late teens or early adulthood and completely knocks them off of their life pathway. And it's a big deal. It's a big, big deal because we're talking about a brain disorder, but there's a lot we can do to help people improve and recover and get back on their life track. Medication is almost always involved, but that's not always an easy process, and so we're helping to make sure that that's working well for the person. Also, psychotherapy, sometimes for symptoms that still don't go away. Sometimes anxiety and depression that need to be dealt with, as well as some of those other major illnesses. There's a lot of research on the connection between using substances and mental illness, and there's a strong connection. The thing is some people have a predisposition or vulnerability. They're going to develop an illness no matter what, and substances usually make that happen sooner than later. There are also some people that would not otherwise develop a mental illness, and drugs seem to trigger that somehow. Different kinds of substances will. Now, any one of us, if we use enough of one thing or another, we can develop symptoms of a major mental illness. Well, what I'm talking about is sometimes that will happen with people using substances, and then those symptoms will stay, and it will develop a disorder that has a life of its own. Anybody that has any kind of mental illness, the symptoms will get worse using substances as well. So it's quite a complicated connection, but there definitely is a strong one. So in the Valley, we probably expect somewhere around 1% of people are going to develop a major illness like schizophrenia. 3 to 5% of people are going to develop a major illness like schizophrenia, another kind of psychosis, bipolar disorder, and probably 2 or 3 times that, a minimum, are going to develop a severe enough anxiety or depression that's going to interfere with their life. Ultimately, people who are isolated may not have a place to live, and I guess what I mean by that is not a stable place to live. So I'm not just talking about shelter, but I'm talking about some level of stability, connections with other people. If those things are missing and symptoms keep on persisting, there are a lot of people that either continue to get worse and worse. Some will die from suicide, and some will end up even in the criminal system or the justice system, where there's really no need for that to have happened.
So we're just probably a half a kilometer outside of the actual town of Kentville, even though it doesn't really look like it. So it's kind of, it might not be a warm shelter per se, but it's somewhere that people can find a place to sleep if they need to find some shelter out of the wind or have a spot that they could call home for the night.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of sleep. Really, when it's this cold or colder, you're tossing and turning, rolling around. You might get a collective hour of sleep throughout the night, and then you got to wake up the next day and try to go and stay afloat. You've been abandoned. At that point, you've been abandoned, and nobody cares. So I remember wishing and praying and like making bargains. If you give me a warm spot to sleep, then I'd quit smoking or whatever, those kinds of things. I would think about it. I had no reason to move forward, to keep living, except my family, and not wanting my younger siblings to have to go through what I went through just in this brief period of my life.
I felt just a little bit lost and alone, wishing like I had a bit more family support at times. For me, I would rather not have to deal with the abuse at home that I was dealing with than to put myself in the situations that I had to be, even though it was sometimes life or death situations to get through the night. It was still my own area that I didn't have to be controlled by somebody else and yelled at or even physically abused.
Yeah, sometimes you choose it.
Yeah.
This is nicer.
Yeah.
So the portal was the only one for me that ever really did anything, and there were certain things in government that existed that were available that did help me, but I had no idea of them or how to access them or anything like that.
It's like they almost keep it it's hard to access the support programs that they have unless
as a kid you need an adult support of some kind to open those doors for you. And so that's what the portal is, really. It's an adult who can partner with a youth or be a support to a youth and open those doors or show them that they exist in the first place.
I think we need more people like us out there. There's not enough, and that's the problem with the world nowadays, is people are too wrapped up in their own lives that they can't take a few minutes to ask somebody how they're doing or if they need help with anything. I live by the saying, you can't change yesterday, but you can make it better tomorrow, you know what I mean? So it's kind of just a hope for building something in the future, having a positive hopes for something better down the road.
So we have 46 youth that are experiencing homelessness. This is a bad thing for numerous reasons. One, that counts as an adverse childhood event. So those youth are automatically at risk of higher mental health problems long-term, higher physical health problems long-term. And we also know that being homeless is a high risk factor for sexual exploitation. YWCA in Halifax, they did a project in 2020. They interviewed 95 sex workers, and 68% of them said that when they got into the sex trade, they were under 18. So if you didn't know, it's illegal to buy sex from a minor. So all of those people, of that 68%, were having crimes committed against them. So of the 95 people that they interviewed, 65 of them said they started in the sex trade because they needed money. 32% of them said it was because they were homeless. And then another 27 said that at that time they were experiencing violence in their family homes. We partnered also to get some more specific data from what's called Nova Scotia Engage. So they did one of the largest quality of life studies actually in North America, and it was in Nova Scotia. So there's quality of life data for the whole province, but we asked them to kind of funnel down, what about the Annapolis Valley specifically? And so the demographics they were looking at were between 16 and 24-year-olds for our area, and 31% of them said that they were not satisfied with their sense of belonging in community. 43% responded that their mental health was bad. 66% said that they had a negative life experience in the last year because of their mental health issues. 37% said they were dissatisfied with their mental wellness. So that's concerning, because if there is this relational breakdown aspect of homelessness and poverty, it means that as a community, we're not really doing a good enough job to help everybody feel welcome here.
I don't know how much this just makes me seem old, but one thing that I certainly notice, within the Valley, we don't have the same connections in community that we did once upon a time. I'll say decades ago. People are connected, but there's online connections. There isn't the same level of connection where, let's say, a neighbor or a friend just checks in, like in real life, checks in on somebody else to see how they're doing. In many ways, the digital world has been awesome to help us connect with people that are more remote, and we at least have some kind of a connection. But the level of community has gone down. And I think that's something that, you know, if you're a family member of someone who's going through one of these difficulties, it's critically important to be, you know, that support for that person. I'd like to emphasize again, how much this is a big deal and it can really interrupt a person's life. But there is tremendous hope and nowadays tremendous expectation that people will recover and move forward in life.
So we've often talked about wraparound support for youth. I thought it might be helpful to break that down a bit. Wraparound is really all of the support services coming together in one accord to serve and support youth. Tied to all of those services, or at the central part of all of those services, is a caring adult that's there for that young person on a regular basis. So wraparound means mental health and addiction support. It means working with probation or anyone around the justice system, community services, which is two different parts, income assistance, employment supports, and actually child welfare as well. And then in addition to that, the education piece. When all of those key departments, but also key parts of a youth's life are all working in unison, then we end up seeing the best outcomes for that youth. But like you'll hear myself say and others say, really at the root of that, and what's the most effective in terms of that, is that connection that can be made between the youth and that adult that is somehow tied to that support or service in the community. The greater the compassion and understanding and the more effective the care, the better the outcomes that the youth experiences. Trevor, you've told me a lot about your story. And you've told me about the challenges when you were young. Talk to me about that last year before you left home. What was it like? It's not about blaming anyone, but what was it like at home?
Personally, I suffered a lot with drugs and alcohol, and my father didn't want that in me, so our relationship started to veer off.
Right.
And
when you say veer off, do you mean like it went downhill?
yeah, it went downhill a lot because he wanted to see the best in me, and that wasn't the best in me.
Right.
When I left my dad's place, I just, all my stuff was out there on the doorstep ready for me to go, and I'll be honest, I did shed some tears when I seen all that and all the doors were locked, but I just went on my way, and my spot that I had to go where I knew there was food and stuff was Annapolis.
Right.
I had no money, but I needed food, so obviously I'd go in the stores, steal some food, and then be on with myself. But Annapolis was the spot I had to go because I knew there was food.
Some youth have told me, and some we've guessed and speculated, but the feeling of abandonment, the feeling of shame, the feeling of just being alone is pretty scary. And people wonder why kids get lured into moving drugs or being involved in crime or even breaking in and stealing something. Chances are, for a lot of them, it's because of desperation and need. And so that feeling of being alone can cause us to be vulnerable, can cause us to be exploited, can cause us to do things we wouldn't normally do.
I spent a lot of nights. There's some nights I'd sleep under picnic tables at the Miners Marsh, and other nights I'd be sleeping in banks, anywhere where there's at least a little bit of coverage from the weather. My sister knew a guy, and she messaged him, and he contacted me and asked about my situation, and he wanted me at Tim Hortons with one of his friends, Russell.
Yeah.
And it took a lot for me to build up the confidence to go and have a lot of trust issues, so I didn't know if it was something I could trust or not.
Yeah.
When I met them at Tim Hortons, made sure I got something to eat, and then took me up and I had a shower and gave me a bag full of toothbrushes and soaps and clothes, and so it got me back up on my feet.
Yeah.
When I got a place to stay and the income assistance to help me stay there, it was just around when school was starting back up, so it made it a little bit easier that I actually had a roof over my head and whatnot, so that I could go to school and come back and be dry and shower for the next day.
Right.
The biggest help was co-op.
Okay.
I'd find. And with co-op, they got me back in the spot that I was working through a program, Engage.
Yeah.
And just got me back into the field of mechanics. And that's basically what helped me graduate. Because I spent half the day at school and half the day doing mechanic work, which I love. And Dolores made it easy because she'd either just give me a phone call or something and ask me how things are going. And
yeah. Is it true that she didn't give up? She kept persisting and making sure you were able to...
Exactly, and as far as I know, I was one of the first. So it was hard for her.
Yeah.
So she didn't know what she was getting herself into, but she went away with it.
Yeah.
What we see when youth are involved in programs like Career Rising and they're suddenly able to enter the workforce and try something new for the first time, it provides them with an experience of things that they may never have thought about before when it comes to career choices. So suddenly they're thinking of post-secondary. Suddenly they're thinking of opportunities they may never have thought of before. So it's not uncommon for youth who have had these opportunities for summer jobs to then start talking to us about, now I want to go to NSCC. So we can have those discussions about ETW funding at that point, which is basically a youth who would qualify can continue to remain on assistance and receive full funding for them to attend NSCC. So that's a pretty sweet deal. I can remember one youth in particular. I remember the first time I met him. I actually really remember the top of his head more than anything because he couldn't look me in the eye. And by the time he was no longer attached to income assistance, which was through high school, and then subsequent to that, he got a job, you could see the difference in his physical posture. Every part of him looked different. And it's an amazing thing to be able to witness that kind of growth. It's a real privilege, actually. And I really think that when it comes to youth, it's really all about empowering them. And we're really fortunate because our department is really stepping up with providing a lot of supports and services that do that very thing. When you have summer programs that allow youth to get a summer job, that's empowering if a youth has never had a job before. When you tell a youth that they may qualify for the department to cover the cost of their college fees, that's huge. That's empowering. And all of those things are what really can make a huge difference in their lives, because we need to be able to give them pockets of hope, and those are huge pockets of hope.
You know, sometimes people give government a bad rap. In this last couple of years, we've had such an excellent partnership with our funders, and most of the funders are government, but it's also grassroots from the community. So we just have to say thanks, and we have to acknowledge both the community's participation, but also government recognizing that they need to partner with community, and we see that on a regular basis. So we definitely want to give a heartfelt thanks to the folks with Department of Community Services, the Youth Development Initiative, also Employment Supports and Income Assistance, the Nova Scotia Housing and the Homelessness Initiative, and also Child Welfare, who also provides through prevention and early intervention the funding for the Youth Outreach Program. So you can see how there's many different parts, but when it all comes together and then translates to something that's really practical, that's what's going to make outcomes better for youth.
With the portal with you and everything, no matter what I did, I mean, I could steal from a store or, have my ups and downs with my addictions. But no matter what, you didn't see me any different. You still see me as the person I was. and you tried to help me overcome everything. So that's what we need more of.
Right.
Because when little kids go homeless, they don't understand that, they think everybody's against them.
Mm-hmm.
But if they have somebody that they can crutch on and doesn't think too much of what they do wrongly, but still try to help them go on the right path, and it helps them a lot.
Makes a difference.
A lot of people think my life sucks. If you used to take your life and if you could change it with anybody's in the world and you didn't get a pick, would you do it?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'd tell you right now I had a rough life, but I wouldn't change it.
When I think about the thread that runs through each of the stories you're hearing and that we've witnessed, is that feeling of belonging, that feeling of being loved. Because when you have that sense of belonging and you feel loved, you have the courage to face the pain and the trauma. And when you're facing the pain and the trauma and you understand more about why you do the things you do, it's a little easier to take responsibility for yourself. And that's what we've always worked on with us and our partners, that we would help youth to take responsibility in a context or a place of feeling belonging while dealing with their trauma or their pain. And all three need to happen at the same time, but it can take a long time.
Life right now is it's stable, I think. Boring sometimes, but
Boring's good?
yeah, boring's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Better
And
than
you've had a stable place to live for what, 5-6 years now?
5 or 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I recently got my GED. I dropped out of high school because of my mental illness, and I wasn't able to complete it. And it's funny, before I was mentally ill, I never did well academically, and then I wrote my GED a little while ago, and I got like 80s and 90s on it, so that was pretty cool.
Lucas and I get along better now than we ever have. It's just like a total turnaround, and it's like him and I have a really great relationship.
There's a point in life when you kind of see where you are now versus where you were, and then you reevaluate everything and think about it, and you say, do I just want to keep going down the wrong road, or do I want to go down the good road?
Yeah.
I chose the good road.
Thank Above the Cloud Media for taking on this project with us, as well as our youth, community partners, and funders. I'm going to pass the evening over to Kelly McGregor, who's going to introduce our panel and continue on from there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, internet people. Yeah, this is so exciting. We watched it a few times ahead of time so I didn't cry every single time, and I still cry every time. But I have to tell you that the youth that we interviewed, they were really brave. It's a very vulnerable thing to share your story with the world. That's being recorded and sent out all over the place. But one thing that Trevor specifically said was, if I can give a youth who's experiencing homelessness right now hope, I want to do that even if it's really hard for me. And so just the sentiment there is beautiful. But now we're going to have our panel discussion. So I want to introduce Russ Sanchez. He's the director of the portal. And Rachel Bedingfield, she can come up. She is the recreation leader at the town of Kentville. And Julia Chichetto, and she is the chief of police. So please welcome our panelists. Awesome. We can take our masks off once we're sitting. Okay, so the way this is going to work is Julia is going to give her presentation first, and followed by Rachel, and followed by Russ. And that way they each have 10 minutes to kind of share their perspective of the story. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions. So we'll take questions from the live audience, and then also questions can come in through the YouTube feed. And I'll try to keep everybody on track. And I have some backup questions if it gets too quiet in here. If I hear crickets, I'll jump on it. So Julia, do you want to give us a go?
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay. Good. I'm on. So I'm Julia Chichetto, and I'm the chief in Kentville. Previous to Kentville, I had worked 27 years in Halifax and then came up here. So I've had a lot of, I guess, experience with homelessness. A lot, obviously, in the city, because the large city is where we draw a lot of homeless people because of the services and also the ability to do things like solicit for cash and such. But there is absolutely also an issue here in the Valley. And I wanted to start, I guess, by giving the police perspective on the risk of homelessness for not just youth, but for all people. So number one, as you saw in the video, the people who sleep under the bridges on Miners Marsh, we get calls very frequently about people sleeping in Miners Marsh, so that is 100% accurate. But what happens is in the morning when the joggers start to go, they see them and they become upset about that, and then they call the police and need to move them along. So there is, as I say, the weather. The second biggest piece is probably exploitation. So it can come in a variety of forms. It can be sexual exploitation, like you could stay at my house, and then in the middle of the night, somebody comes out and, touches, says you must perform whatever if you want to stay here. And so then that person, often females, but also young males, will be put in a position where they really have no choice. They have to go along with that. Most frequently never reported to the police, if not anybody, because of embarrassment, shame, that sort of thing. There are also assaults. So people disregard the value of a life of a homeless person, so they think nothing of an assault on them. And that can be just a shoving them out of the way. That could be, actually a beating. Not so much, we don't see that a lot in our area, but certainly in the city that's happened. Robberies and thefts, so when they do find a place to sleep with their belongings, as you saw them carrying their belongings and they put them somewhere safe, I mean, you obviously can't carry that much throughout the day, so you may come back and your stuff may have been taken, gone through. If other people who prey on I guess victims think that you have something of value, they may actually rob you, which is to take your stuff using violence. So they may assault you on the street and take your stuff. They can also become victims of people who use them to commit crimes. So, as you heard the young man say, he needed food, so he would go into stores and steal. So there's that side, but then there's also people who, again, will victimize them and say, I'll give you money, but I want you to go steal this for me. And that's where we often see things like breaks into cars or break and enters into homes for specific items. They do come in conflict with the law. So obviously, as I said, there's the thefts. So if you're stealing from a store, the store is not going to want you in the store, so they call the police to deal with that. I will say we have most of the store owners around the Kentville area don't press charges, but they do bar them from the stores, which then creates further issues. Some of them do end up charged for certain offenses. Conflict with the community. So this is where the community needs to recognize that they have a part in this. And I'm going to tell you a little story about him. He's not a youth. He was just in the town of Kentville. He's now in Halifax. But he was in our town for a couple months, and he was relatively harmless. I'm not going to say he didn't have a record. He did, but he was relatively harmless. But his entire face was tattooed. So that did not fit well with what the public wanted in their town. So he was sleeping in bank machines. He was, going into stores because it was cold. It was January, February, and we were getting calls. We were getting multiple calls a day on this man. He really wasn't doing anything except he made people uncomfortable. So we were asked to move him along. And so we did. We moved him out of the store because the store is private property. If you don't want someone in your store, you do have that right. So we would move him along. And unfortunately, it got to the point where he had nowhere to go. So he did go into Halifax where there were some services that were arranged for him. And I suspect he will be back to Kentville once the weather warms up. But for now, he's in the city. So, and then what happens is there's an alienation from your community. You start to feel nobody wants you, which is kind of true. So you start to get defensive, and then that brings about other issues. And Russ once had a thing. We went at the community center, and he had some young people there speak to us. And I actually wasn't in uniform because they're not as open in speaking if they see my uniform. And the young man said, homelessness, it has its issues in the daytime. But he said after everybody goes to bed and after all the stores are closed, it's very scary. And my heart actually broke for the young man because I had never looked at it that way. Because when police interact with anybody in that, they're very defensive, so they come off very tough and, you don't scare me and I don't care that they don't want me here. But he admitted to us that it is very, very scary. So that then creates some mental health issues, which is what brings us here tonight, I guess. So it's my... how many calls? I like to get the audience to participate. Municipal police departments in this province. So there are 10 municipal police departments from Cape Breton through to Annapolis Royal, the biggest of which is Halifax. I have their call numbers from 2019 of calls responded to for mental health only. So that's where mental health is the #1 complaint because the computer generates the level of severity. So in 2019, I'm going to make sure my number's not up there. How many calls do you think that we went to? Just take a guess.
We have a guess of 1,500.
Keep going.
I can't hear you unless I...
5,000 is about accurate.
5,000.
So we have a reported numbers of 4,774 calls just by municipal police agencies. That's not counting the RCMP, who police most of the rural areas. In Kentville alone, we had 191 of those. That's just mental health, so that's not counting well-being checks, which is another big piece of what we do. Somebody's concerned about somebody, so they call it in, would you mind going and checking on them? So I don't have all the numbers across the province for that, but I can tell you that in addition to our 191 mental health calls, we also had 90 well-being checks. So that's in a very small town of 6,200 people. So it's not the RCMP numbers, which I understand are over 5,000, but I don't have them. So that's 10,000 approximately calls just within this province where the police become involved. It also doesn't include ones where a report wasn't generated. So we may just interact with somebody that we know is struggling with mental health, but it's not anything that needs to be put on a report. And it also doesn't include anything that may have led to a different kind of incident. So the call may be a family dispute. And as we saw young Lucas and his mother, it got to the point where he couldn't live at home. So she doesn't live in our area, but I'm assuming there were calls to police there because Lucas I've met. Lucas is a big lad. So if Lucas were to, start to become violent, I am very sure that his mother would have called the police for help. So it doesn't include any of those numbers. The issue is police are not really that well trained in mental health. 2 minutes. Oh my God. Sorry. I told you I could talk. So police aren't that well trained in mental health. So we actually need help. And the problem is that certainly in our area, we don't have help at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we're the ones who are responding. We are the only ones to call at 2 o'clock in the morning. Everything else is closed. And what we need in order to take somebody for help, because we can only arrest them under the IPTA, if they are a risk to themselves or a risk to others. And oftentimes mental health is not actually a risk to themselves, they're not suicidal, and they're not actually affecting anybody else with any threats of violence. So what we do in those cases is we try to convince them, would you like to go to the hospital? And we're fairly successful in that. We can get them to go up, but the problem is when they're a voluntary patient like that, they can also decide that the wait is too long and they can walk back out. So the help is just not there for them. I will cover if we do arrest them under the IPTA and take them, we are there for hours. So in Halifax, that can be up to 12 hours before they have to be seen by an emergency room physician and then a psychiatrist to determine whether or not they'll be admitted. It can be up to 12 hours in the city. In Kentville, I will say Valley Regional has been exceptional, and they try to move us along quicker, but it can still be 3 or 4 hours. So now multiply that by the 4,774 calls that your police are going to. And quite honestly, it's not what we're supposed to be doing. It's a mental health thing. So, do you want me to do my other page? I'm out of time?
You're out of time.
Okay, I'm out of time.
We can circle back with some questions. Thank you. Was there any slides that we didn't get through that were yours? Yeah. We answered that one. Ideal system. Yep. Awesome. Do you want to go all the way to the slides that are Rachel's now? And we'll hand it off to Rachel. Yeah, we'll pick that up. All right, recreation and community.
Hi, everyone. Out of the 2 people representing Kentville here, I'm the happy one, often. Our senior management meetings are a blast when Julia shows up. Welcome, thanks. I'm joking. We work very well together. And I often get asked why I'm sitting at tables, why recreation is involved. And I love this table so much because the people around the table remind me often why recreation is at the table, which for someone who's really passionate about the field makes a big difference. But I wanted to start by this. I love this question so much. So if you can imagine what your life would be without recreation, that's a good place to start for you to experience what it's like for these youth. So if you can imagine that you don't have access to parks or trails, you don't have access to skill development or programming, you don't have access to the arts, theater, music, you'd never come in here. You don't have a public library. You don't have a connection with anyone in the community. That is a daily occurrence for a lot of the youth that the portal and the police work with, actually, often. So it's not that those resources don't exist, but they're inaccessible. And this is one of the reasons why we're sitting at the table, where I sit at the table, why recreation is represented here. Because without all of those things, you can imagine how different your existence would be. And if you were in a state of crisis, you would be very concerned as to who you could turn to and who you could trust. I'll get you to flip to the next slide. I always ask people what they think recreation is. Day camp comes up, some music in a park, a soap slide. But recreation, as defined by the national framework, is the experience that results from freely chosen participation in physical, social, intellectual, creative, and spiritual pursuits that enhance individual and community well-being. Essentially, everything that you choose to do, that you do for your quality of life, is considered recreation, which is really broad, isn't it? It's really broad. It's much broader than the given definition that often people pigeonhole us in. But what happens is when you're disenfranchised, that freedom to choose gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you rely on subsidized programs, or you need to apply for this funding in order to be able to access this particular sport or activity, but not the arts. We don't have funding to support you for the arts, so you can't necessarily do that. And you still need to find money for your cleats and your shin pads. And I need you to do a chocolate bar campaign so that you can fundraise for the trip that all the other kids need to go on. You can see how it builds up and builds up. I don't even know what I put on these slides. I'm gonna get up. Sorry. Recreation is a fundamental human need for citizens of all ages and interests and is essential to the psychological, social, and physical well-being of all people. This was a statement that was written way back in '74. All of these statements were adopted by all the federal and provincial and territorial governments, that this was a fundamental need. We need the ability to access quality of life as individuals, as community, as a country. Next slide, please. Recreation is a social service in the same way that health and education are considered as social services. What you're hearing consistently throughout what everybody is saying, and what we hear all the time from youth, is that they just want to feel connected and they want to feel loved, so that when they are at a state of crisis, which, I mean, we were all youth before. Listen, you could wake up and be in a state of crisis, but you have a place to turn to and you have someone to talk to. And when you don't have that, when you don't have that team to go to, when you don't have that coach to depend on, that music teacher, that bus driver, whatever it is, then that's when things turn south, and that's when the portal steps in. Recreation's purpose should be to assist in individual and community development, to improve the quality of life, and to enhance social functioning. I always go over these things because your municipal tax dollars go towards recreation. Recreation is a public service. If your municipal recreation department or organization or efforts are not doing this, then you need to ask different questions. Next slide. And we also need to do a better job of working together. One of the things we hear often when we're talking to folks in our community about recreation, and specifically youth, is that they wish that we would collaborate more, so that people who are receiving services and supports and benefits in Kentville can also head down the trail and receive the same in New Minas, in Wolfville, in Berwick, whatever that is. And we're failing our youth miserably. This is one of the things that came up in the pandemic. We were told right away from organizations that we partner with, like the Portal, that our youth are struggling, they need support, they need mental well-being. And so our department worked really, really closely to support that. But it was a huge struggle, and it's still a struggle, and we don't have enough resources to meet the mental well-being needs of youth in our community. The pandemic was the perfect time for communities to invest in recreation, to invest in well-being. Instead, we closed our parks, we closed our trails, we cut departments, we cut funding, we did all of these things. All the coping mechanisms we had been working with our community to say, this is what you can do when you need to de-stress. You can go into the woods, you can talk to your friends, you can gather. All of that was taken away. And everybody immediately who was struggling struggled even further and went darker and deeper. And the Portal, as an example, was one of those organizations that was head deep, knee deep into just trauma after trauma, and all we could do was to support them as much as possible. Next slide. So recreation equals resiliency, and I'm here to kind of bust a myth. Resiliency isn't developed when you experience trauma. Resiliency is developed when you are surrounded by love and community, and that's the benefit of investing in recreation and community development from the get-go, right? Because you know that you have that. So if you do experience some kind of trauma, you have the support network, you have the skills, you have the tools. We talk about our toolbox all the time to be able to work through it. Resilient individuals, families, and communities can survive in the face of ongoing change or threat because of their resiliency. The pandemic would be a really good example of that. Next slide. In short, they thrive. And this is what the goal, if you remember back to the definition of recreation, is to help individuals and communities thrive. I put this quote in here. If anybody's read Sweetgrass, I encourage you to do it. But sweetgrass is best planted not by seed, but by putting roots directly in the ground. Thus, the plant is passed from hand to earth to hand across years and generations. Its favorite habitat is sunny, well-watered meadows. It thrives along disturbed edges. I can't remember if it was Kelly or Julia, but the stat about feeling welcome or not feeling welcome in our community, I kind of picture that linked with the sweetgrass. We need to have our youth plant roots in our community. This was one of the goals of the Irony Commission. We have to get people to want to stay here. We have to support our youth in feeling welcomed and loved and going through all of those hard things. So I've been told that's why I sit at this table. Thanks.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Rachel.
Thank you.
You know, if I thought I felt emotional during the documentary, knowing the youth stories, I actually felt more emotional when Rachel was talking, which is kind of weird, but you really shared the heart of it. Thank you. I want to begin by just, it's not a slide, it's not facts, it's really the thread that you're hearing already. Julia talked about and drew attention to that lack of connection. And even I think Kim said something about disconnection or conflict with the community. And I had a conversation last night that was related to that. And it was, you know, oftentimes it's conflict in my home, then it's with my community, and then it begins all the breakdown stuff. And I mean, Rachel said it well. It comes down to what Glenn also identified, and that's the loss of the village. The sole purpose of the village was to raise the child to adulthood, and that just doesn't exist like it used to. And it especially doesn't exist for the young person that's disconnected with family and the neighbors and school and things like that, and that's the path of homelessness. I thought it would be appropriate before I share some facts, and see what we did was we looked at policing and mental health and the cost of youth homelessness. We're looking at recreation and the vitalness of being connected to community, and then I'm going to talk about what currently is the situation. But before I do that, I think it's important to say, why do I care about this stuff? And I was reflecting this afternoon on my story and my wife Cynthia and our kids and our story. When I was in university, I became a part of this family. They invited me to live in their home because I cared about their kids. And it was a give and a receive situation. I thought, no wonder I love host homes so much. It's so related to my story. And then as we went from young married couples, never do this, by the way. In the first year of marriage, I invited this young man to come live with us because he was homeless. Not a thing to do in your first year or two of marriage. But that sort of thread of reaching out and drawing someone into our family was always just a part of what we did. But for my daughters, it was a win. It really impacted their life, and it has to help develop their worldview. But it made a significant difference for the single mom or the young man with a mental health issue. And we had the resources, we had the ability, we had the space, and so it wasn't really bad or wacky. It was actually something that was good. And that's going to come out when I share some of these housing stories. But I also want to bring in another personal part. A close family friend of ours, about a year and a half ago, she was at risk in the relationship she was in, and her housing was at risk. And it was super challenging. It's like, what do we do? What's our role as a community? What's our role as someone that cares for her? And so when we supported her to get a place, then I realized what was unfolding the next few months was my daughters and my wife were providing the housing support she needed. All of that was happening organically. All of it through the last 30 years for my wife and I, it happened organically. It happened because we stepped out, took a risk, and invited someone in. And now with this young lady, it's the same thing. Someone visits or helps clean up. And it's the soft or the qualitative part about what I'm going to talk about. And that's why we promote this stuff. Because a lot of us have had some lived experience where it's our own kids or it's our nephew or niece or something like that. So let's dig into some of that. So a little while ago, Acadia took this on. And it's a wonderful big step here in the Valley. Acadia every 2 to 3 years is going to do what's called an agency-based point-in-time count. That means it's a count right now for a period of time, and in this case it was done like they did in Cape Breton. It was 1 month, and it was across the ages. So it was everyone. And we had, what are the numbers? 36 frontline workers administered the survey from 13 organizations. 400 surveys went out. 247 were completed, and the age was 16 plus. Now, what these numbers don't represent is the fact that 118, if that's correct, Kelly, of the ones of that 247 had children. And so we don't even have children indicated here. So that number is a lot bigger than 247. And so I want to define those quickly. Emergency is they are drawing on some kind of emergency service. Unsheltered literally means in that month, 30 people were unsheltered. Sleeping in a car, sleeping in a shed, something like that. Provisionally is what we call also couch surfing, so that's hidden, and they're in some kind of transition kind of place, so it's just provisionally sheltered. And then 127 people were at risk. Let's go to the next slide. And we even had, because of the researcher and her great work, and this is being released like I think this month officially, broke it down, Kings, Annapolis, West Hampton, across ages. So Kelly earlier said that number totaled. She said 51 in terms of youth. That's up to the age of 21. But if we add the number up to 24, it's actually, what did I add up? 71 individuals. So it's kind of overwhelming. Now that's spread out across the valley, and that's all of those agencies connecting and contacting those youth. So it's fairly concerning. I mean, all of the numbers are concerning, and you can see that in Kings County it's the highest number. Let's go to the next slide. So you can take a look at this more. I don't know if we provided it in the packet, but it's on the website. This is a recording of our journey, not just the portal, but all of the agencies and individuals that are connected with Homeless No More, and it's where it's going. I'm not going to get much into it, but to say, oh, I get to use my pointer. Yeah, they were groaning earlier.
4 minutes.
Oh my, I get to use my pointer, but do it in 4 minutes. So we, you've seen some of this through the documentary, all the causes of youth homelessness. This has been a lot of the work around just bringing the right people together, having the right conversations. I'm about to unpackage this in 4 minutes, so that should be interesting. The supports that go on in the valley, I've never worked in any place in the world where there isn't such great camaraderie and support for one another and working together. It's fantastic. And so a lot of that wraparound stuff is there. But let's move on to the slide about housing. Sorry that my mic is doing weird things. So think of this as two plans. One plan that's for those that are at risk of being homeless or have been homeless, but there's got to be a sister plan to this. And so we're looking for a cool name. So if you think of a cool name for the other plan, let me know. But this is the supportive housing side. This is the affordable housing side. And then, as you all know, there's also the market housing side. Because right now, even if you have money, you can't find a place to live, let alone if you lack the resources or you need support. So all of these are the options that we're pursuing across the board. Everybody is getting on board. We've got municipalities having awesome conversations. We have landlords coming to Kelly and saying, we want to be a part of this, which is awesome because in the valley, you can also get blacklisted and no landlord will rent to you. So we have to address those things. And there's more and more supports coming into place so that the people in these different housing options can be supported. Real quick, host homes, you can read about on our website. We've got stories, we've got great things happening. But host homes are not just for youth. Host homes could be for a senior, they could be a survivor of domestic violence, they could be for somebody with mental health issues. And it's just simply a matter, you got a spare room, let's use that. Also called home share, we've seen examples in other countries. And it takes some sacrifice, but the outcomes for both parties can be amazing. Garden, which we're going to do some follow-up when we do the calls to action. Garden is the name we're using for those accessory dwelling suites. So if you have the ability to build a suite in your basement or in your backyard, and my wife and I did this in Calgary for years, and it was awesome. Helped with the expenses, but also somebody got to choose how much to be a part of our family or us choose how much to be a part of their family. Supportive housing and transitional housing some would think is the same, but some people might need support for the rest of their life, whereas transitional housing might only be 3 months to 3 years. And so different pieces and different levels of support will come into play in those different examples. 1 minute. Let's flip to the next slide. This is available online, but there's been enough wonderful examples in the country of looking at acuity or severity of need and the level of support. And that's broken down now in a system called Coordinated Access, which we're launching. And Kelly, I want to publicly say thank you for all your hard work. She took a lot of what she learned in Calgary, and we've been putting it in practice here. And so when you have a coordinated access, you can make decisions not based upon your perceived view of urgency, but actually acuity based on an objective perspective of what's going on in that person's life. And then you can choose the right housing option and the right level of support. But a lot of this stuff can come up with your questions and the questions we've got poised.
Yes, it's very fun trying to keep Russ on track sometimes. I love it. All right, we really did want this to be a discussion and really wanted to give the opportunity to take questions and get some conversation going. So hopefully this gives you enough of a background to be able to ask some good questions. So I'm going to throw it out there. Does anybody in the audience have a specific question right now? And it can be to one particular member, it can just be to the group, just to throw it out for everybody to discuss together. What is the easiest way for somebody who hasn't helped before to help? Was that right? Do you each want to take a turn?
You know, I think it's knowing what we're good at. What's our thing? There's someone in the audience, he's a farmer. Good at farming. Take someone along. Good at woodworking. You know, fix something. If you got extra room in your house. If you love to go for hikes. People, last weekend there was 3 couples and they were clearing a storage shed and throwing things out and getting stuff ready for what we call apartment in a box. And so they had a whole apartment in a box ready, and the young men came by with the van, picked up the stuff, delivered it to a new youth. So I think it's about a good match. What skills do you have? What's your heart? Are you a safe person? We'll screen and things like that. And it's not just the portal. The plan that's going on right now with Homeless No More goes across the whole sector. If you say, I want to work with a senior. I want to work with a young family. We have all of those connections and those relationships. And if you look at the stats, families are actually more in need right now of affordable housing than even youth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to take a stab at what you would say?
Yeah, I think actually Russ said most of it, you know, and it sounds really chintzy, but what we're hearing is that people don't, in this case youth, don't feel welcome in the communities. It was said in the video, right, that things have changed over the years, that, you know, you may, if you feel comfortable in Wolfville, you may not feel comfortable in Kentville, you may not feel comfortable in Berwick, for whatever reason, and part of that is because, you know, we're not necessarily doing a great job of working together and being consistent. And when you're vulnerable, that's really confusing. I think, you know, as an individual, what I always tell folks is, you know, to lead with empathy, to develop opportunities with empathy, to put the youth or the person you're trying to support in the center of all of your decisions. Anybody who's vulnerable is out there navigating systems that have been created not to necessarily benefit them, but benefit the people who have created the systems, and that's a whole other talk. But I think that's a really important piece, that often people who are struggling don't have the energy to have voice. And you know, one of the things that I love so much, and Russ demonstrates it so well in that video, is just his ability to listen, and just sit there and listen and understand, and not negate or argue. And I think we just need more of that. It sounds really simplistic, but it's missing.
So for me, I guess it's let us or somebody know before they're in crisis, so that the call's not at 2 o'clock in the morning, so that if you see your neighbor or you see something going on in the community, if we can get in front of that, and I mean, I sit on a mental health liaison committee, which is all through the valley. So that's, you know, mental health professionals, police, courts, it's everybody. So we can bring that to the table there. Russ is in my speed dial, and Russ has been called by me on multiple occasions when we have somebody who is not a criminal, but who is struggling but does not meet the mental health thing. So we can reach out to those helping partners before they're in serious trouble. And I think a little bit to build on what Rachel said is be kind. So, you know, the man with the tattoos is not actually a risk. He looks different than we do, but he actually didn't do much other than look different. So it's a tolerance and recognize what's actually dangerous. And I can tell you that having worked in Halifax for a long time, the Valley is extremely safe. So most people are not actually a risk to you.
I want to just tie in quickly because the tattoo guy, that's what I want to call him because I don't want to use his name. People in our building were upset, and of course they all came to me and told me about tattoo guy, and he kept coming in the bathroom, and they were concerned and things like that. Here's the sad thing. I avoided tattoo guy. I knew that if I started a conversation, it would take a lot of my time, and I was quite busy that week. And so I was avoiding him. Then finally, after 3 or 4 days of that, I got convicted. Like, Russ, you're being a jerk. Like, go ask him his name. So I started saying that to people. Have you asked his name? Then I thought, oh, I better ask his name. So I went in the washroom, and he was in the washroom. So I said, what's your name? And he told me, and then he started talking to me. And it's that step that we all are afraid to take, or we're too busy to take, by saying what's going on. Whether it's a single mom that lives next door, whether it's the guy that looks a bit scary, or you're just too busy. Like, just to take that little step, because then I could say to the people, he's not dangerous. He's confused right now. He's probably off his meds. And yeah, I got Julia on speed dial too. Because then if I need help, I can say, hey, I need some help. That's it,
We have a question from online.
We have a question from online, yep. Lisa Lauthers is asking, what is the first step? Who do we contact?
I'm going to defer that because there's a whole nother section after we do discussion on calls to action. So I'm going to give some very clear next steps to take with all of the emails and phone numbers associated for each call to action. So we will get to that, I promise.
And then the next question, because we're going to skip Nancy's as hers will be answered as well, is Caroline. How do we make our communities more welcoming for youth?
Go ahead.
So notice nobody said my number was on speed dial. I just want to point that out.
No, you're actually in the same list.
That's fine. Whatever. It's good. I like my sleep.
It's not really speed dial anymore. We're revealing our age.
It's just, hey, Siri.
It's favorited.
How do we make our communities more welcoming? I think that's a really great question, and I think everybody has their own answer. We've said it multiple times, and it's easier said than done. As someone who likes to go home at the end of the day and not talk to anybody, I live on the mountain for a reason. You just kind of have to put yourself out there and generally be a nice person. But, back to what we were talking about before, because that's easier said than done. I also have received calls, obviously not emergencies, but I've received calls from people who are in the community, and because they know that I'm in charge of benches, these people are sitting on the bench. What are you going to do about it? And I say, well, what are they doing?
That was right after the benches were installed.
Yeah. What are they threatening you? Is there a weapon? Because you should call Julia. I have her on speed dial.
She emails.
Yeah, I just email. Are they? Have they taken their clothes off? Like, what is going on? Well, they just make me feel uncomfortable, and then I have to have this conversation by saying that's actually not their problem. That's your problem. Unless they're doing something that is causing you harm, then that's on you. And so far, whenever I ask this question, no one's been able to give me an answer, but no one can tell me the difference between loitering and vibrancy, other than it's who the people are that people feel most comfortable around. So I go back to what Julia said, we just got to be more decent and understand that everybody has their story. And for whatever it is, bringing it back to youth, we like kids up until the point they turn into teenagers, and then we really like them again when they turn into young adults. But in between there, we don't want to see them. And I've been asked, I don't know how many times, how are you going to deal with that youth problem at the skate park? I don't know what that is yet, but yeah, it's a bit of a struggle, and I think that,
You haven't gotten calls like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I shouldn't say calls. I've been asked by people. Yes. Yeah, I just think it has to do with decency, and it is a struggle. But even the people who vandalize or who bent that Miners March sign that I noticed in that video, they're still in our community. They still have rights. They still deserve to be loved and feel belonged. Feel belonged? They deserve to belong. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and I think what gets them to the point of bending that sign is the frustration for how they were treated like they weren't wanted all day. And then they go into there and they have anger and they have hurt and they have all of that. And the loitering and the vibrancy, just yesterday morning was a call from one of the local banks. There's youth loitering. And what it was is, I mean, they were youth, quite possibly your clients, but they're picking up the Wi-Fi. They're trying to stay connected. They can't afford, who can afford, data, so they're just hanging near the bank to pick up Wi-Fi, but nobody wants them near the bank. So they call the police. Please make them go away. If that were you, I would not get a call. So, because you're okay, but you're not. So, that's the piece we really have to get better at.
Sounds like it sounds like a huge stigma piece, really. There's these preconceived notions that youth are automatically dangerous. And so people are calling police, and police have to respond. But if you don't have that stigma, if you think, oh, they look like they're having fun, that's great, youth need fun, then this becomes a totally different situation.
One of my favorite stories, there's so many stories of shocking people. This was like years and years and years and years ago when I first got this job, and we were working with the Kentville Business Commission, and they decided that they wanted to put a piano out under the gazebo in Center Square, and everyone said, that's going to get broken, that's going to get busted, whatever. And so I said, well, it's a free piano off Kijiji, so worst case scenario, we're gonna have to clean it up. And as they were bringing it in and putting it under the gazebo, these youth undesirables came up to me and said, what's up with the piano? And I said, that's just there for people to play. You can play it whenever you want. And they said, well, that's going to get busted. And I said, I know, people think it's going to be you. And they said, oh, do you want us to keep an eye on it? And I said, yes, I do. And that piano never got touched ever, other than to be played, and in a lot of drunken videos that were posted, which was lovely. Yeah, and it's the same thing when we changed over some of the planter pots downtown to put food in them. People were saying, why are you doing that? People are going to steal the food, which there was a whole education piece around public food. But they're going to pee in it. Like they're just going to go around and pee in the pots. And I'm like, who are you hanging out with? This is kind of crazy, but also wash your food.
Do you have any more online questions? Any more questions from the audience so far? No? This is good. This is why I come prepared with more questions. You didn't get a chance to totally finish your housing solution, so this is good. Are there any other housing solutions that you can think of that haven't been mentioned yet that you want people to consider?
Yeah. We've been discussing this with municipal leaders and landlords and developers. And that's, if I'm going to be in support of affordable housing, but you build 20 of them and they're all the same, that's going to create a ghetto. So everything that we're grappling with planners, with developers, with landlords, potential, and the agencies, is we will not be involved in that at all. It needs to be a split like 75-25, so that 75% of the housing is market value, 25% is affordable and supported. Now, it doesn't need to have a shingle hung outside that says, yeah, I'm poor and I need support. There's been great examples in other places where it's done well, and it's a desirable place to live. So we're developing a concept. We're calling it the Village. We don't know what else to call it. If somebody comes up with a better name, please share it with us. That would be like that, but also we would be pushing the envelope around intergenerational community, common space or communal space or community space in the middle of some of these little housing developments. And we would make sure that the Village is not just representing the different generations, but
just looking at every angle possible and looking at every best practice. And so far as we've been talking about this village concept with a few of the municipalities and some of the developers and even people are liking the idea. And why should we settle for second best? Why should we say, well, they did that in Vancouver and that's really awesome, or they do that in Holland and they've got seniors together with young adults and isn't that great? Well, why can't we do it here? We've got a tremendous housing crisis. There's federal dollars available. The provincial government is engaged, and now at this stage, we're talking to municipal leaders. And so that, to me, is a huge piece and a huge option that we are pursuing. And I think it needs to be a desirable option. So it's not one size fits all. I think it's looking at all the different kind of housing stuff, all of the different population that needs those different options, and then having the right support in place for the people in those situations. Because as crazy as some of the experiences my wife and I have had over the years, because, that throws you off. You think we had some hairy experiences. But, when someone's struggling with their mental health, there is stuff that will happen. But if you're taught, if you learn, if you grow, if you trust them, they trust you, you can, at the end of the day, just kind of laugh. And we've done that at times, Lucas and I have laughed about some of the challenging experiences he's had and the fact that someone was there for him. And in the midst of those different housing options, there's some great stories and some great lived experiences that come out of really including people and belonging.
Can I cover one of my slides that I missed because I talked too much? So what you can do for us as the police, and actually for people who are struggling with mental illness, is, Russ and I have talked, and it's actually starting to take root all across Canada. And Halifax was one of the leaders in it. It's called the Mobile Mental Health Crisis Team, which is a team of health professionals, social workers, and police officers who work 20-hour days. There is a gap in the middle of the night, although there's still a phone line, where they respond before the trouble is actually, where it is a crisis. So they reach out to people that they know are starting to struggle, and they preventatively get them in or get them meds or make the change. And the police officer role is only for protection. So when I say we're not well trained, I'm not going to say we don't have any training, but think of how many years a mental health professional actually goes to school, and we get, maybe a week of mental health training. So we're not well trained. So our role there is strictly an arrest under the IPTA if it's needed, or protection of the healthcare people if the person becomes violent. And that's what our role should be, quite honestly. So that's the help we could use, is a push to have that be implemented up here in the Valley. I know they'll tell me that they have a team, and they do, and it's available, I believe, 8:30 to 4:30, which is great, and the other 16 hours a day you can call us. So that's what we could use as a push for that.
I know I'm moderating, but I want to jump in a little bit. In Calgary, we called it the PAC team, and it was one police officer and a social worker. And as the housing support worker in a residential facility, I cannot tell you the difference in response between when they were available and when police only was available. The de-escalation skills that a social worker has. Also, they're not in uniform, which is a huge, as soon as the police officer, even if they have all the training in the world, if you're in uniform, you're an authority figure, and somebody who's having a mental health crisis is immediately intimidated. Your functioning shuts down, you're not able to listen well. All sorts of things happen when you're in this kind of triggered response, and so really that support from a social worker or that kind of professional, it's invaluable in de-escalating situations, and also being able to then get appropriate information to be able to relay to professionals, because I can bet that somebody in crisis is not giving you all the information that you need as a police officer to pass on, because they're scared. So yeah, that's huge. We have one more question from 3 questions? Ooh, okay.
Okay, our first question is from Nancy, and this is for all the panel members. What would you say has been your greatest success to date with respect to homelessness?
I'm going to go first because it's easier. I'm going to say when I first came here, Russ set up the Homeless No More group and brought us all together And so that building off of everybody's strengths and having connections to reach out to has been probably the biggest success, I think.
Well, and related to that, Dolores was on the video and she's here. Back 9-10 years ago, it was Dolores and I, that's it. And it's really changed a lot. So I would say one piece of the success story is the fact that anyone that's challenged with that many complex issues, we've got a great team that supports one another and addresses those things and problem solves. It's not just each one of us thinking about what our work is with that youth, but together supporting them and problem solving. So the greatest success actually has been the young people that have gone through that process and have had support from what we call our youth community hub. And now it's spreading. We've got one going on in Annapolis, and we have a different name, but something else like that in West Hants. And so it's checking each other, and it's helping to make sure that when you're frustrated with this young person because they keep struggling and having trauma responses to stuff, and you don't have the right perspective. Like, I've been stopped in my tracks by a social worker, and I'm thinking, that's not even your client. You're telling me no? Like, that's our client. You can't say no. That's what I felt like. But the fact is she cared. And so if I can't reach that person, but she can, we're doing well. And so I've seen just real change in so many. So it's hard to answer that question. But just before I came over here, I met with a young man, and he was actually on the video. And, he's done really well. There's all kinds of people that played a role in his life. He went through high school. He got an apprenticeship. He's now finishing up, he's in training to be a mechanic. And not his fault, but the people he lives with are fighting every day. Well, he came from a family where there was lots of fighting. And so it's stressing him out. One night he left me a voicemail just last week. And on the voicemail it said, "Hey Russ, I'm walking in New Minas. I don't know where I'm going to stay tonight. I sure hope you can, how's it going with that apartment request with Kelly?" Well, just before I came over here, I went over, drove over, and I said, "I just need you to sign this. Pretty sure we got a place for you, and you can help us interview roommates." Because it's not his problem. It's actually the couple he's living with. But his housing is at risk again, And so just being able to be there through those ups and downs, I said, and it's not just me, it's a multitude of people involved in these kids' lives now. And I would say that for our community is a success.
Just quickly, because I know there's lots of questions. This is going to be a really strange response, but this big success for me is a deeper understanding with how much we're failing our youth in my sector. Yeah, that's been a real eye-opener for me, especially over the past year and a bit. The pandemic kind of put a glaring piece on that when people immediately slipped into states of crisis and we had no way to support them. I didn't have any way to support them because of, things had changed a little bit. And it gave us pause and allowed us to examine the system within which I work, both the recreation and sport delivery system, and how the way that it's currently set up is in fact causing continuous harm on communities. So those folks who are able to access this traditional system are often folks that have enough to be able to navigate, to afford transport, to all of these different things. And when you don't have that, you feel a continual state of lesser than. And that's something that we have to take a hard look at. I have testimonial for, a mom who was able to get her kid into hockey one year and sat in the stands and sat next to people who didn't know that she was struggling. And she said, when I'm here in this arena, I don't feel poor. And that has massive implications to how she then is able to navigate her life and how she prioritizes quality of life with her kids. And our systems aren't set up to create more stories like that. And so that's been a huge learning and hard lesson for me, and a success that, continually putting money towards funding programs that allow you to access a broken system is not going to be sustainable in the long run. And so we need to take a hard look at what that is.
Thank you. Our next question is from Louise. What policy options are available for protecting renters from being priced out of housing opportunities?
Kelly, I think you're the only one qualified to answer that.
I didn't quite hear it all. Can you say it one more time?
Yep. What policy options are available for protecting renters from being priced out of housing opportunities?
The honest truth right now is there is none. That we have, it's a supply and demand issue. Sorry, I'm answering this because I'm the housing locator, but okay. It's a supply and demand issue right now. There is very limited supply, close to none in comparison to the demand, so landlords are able to charge whatever they want. And if you go onto the Facebook groups in our particular area, we have like Annapolis Valley for rent, where it's supposed to be a place where you can find housing, but what's happening is people are saying, I need this, I need a 2-bedroom, I can pay this price, and then somebody else is putting on, I need a 2-bedroom, and they're upping the price. And landlords know that, and they're saying to me as the housing locator, you know, I can rent basically a complete dump. I don't have to worry about renovating it, even if there's issues, and I can ask whatever I want for it. And there is no policy that can fix that right now. It's not going to move fast enough through legislation or anything to be able to do that, because they're not breaking any rules, because it's not upping rent on a current tenant. As soon as there's turnover, they can renovate or do whatever they want. But having said that, also as a landlord, I mean, there are really awesome landlords, and this is also your business. Sometimes this is sustaining their retirement. So it's not necessarily that landlords are trying to straight up gouge everybody. It's just they can, so they do. And when they're asking higher price points, they're finding that they're having less issues in the long run with damages or things like that. So they're kind of, in a sense, hedging their bets. If I do charge the higher price, maybe there'll be less issues. And as a housing locator, what I'm saying is, if I can connect you with a person who I know is supported well, would you be willing to give it to us at a lesser price so somebody with a lower income can still have housing? And what I'm finding is landlords are willing. Landlords are absolutely willing. If they know there's somebody that they can call to, if there is an issue that comes up, or if that person who's been struggling with anxiety and depression, not being able to keep their house clean, somebody's going to go and visit them and say, hey, can we do the dishes together? Or, hey, I think you missed garbage day. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again. Landlords are willing. There's no vacancies. I have great relationships. I mean, Safeguard was amazing. Last year during COVID, we couldn't find enough host homes because people were afraid of transmission, which is 100% like reasonable. And so we just said, hey, like, could you just give us a chance so we can house a couple youth in a unit? We will support them well. We'll have a youth outreach worker in there. We'll have the social worker in there. We'll have a rec person connecting. Like, the unit will be monitored. And he said, yeah, let's see how it goes. And now we have like 20 youth in individual apartments, all being supported externally. That program's going so well. So landlords are willing to do it, but those landlords who are so willing to work with us, in the last 2 months, it's again and again, I don't have anything available. There's no vacancy. Nobody's leaving units because they know there's nowhere to go. And that's a very long question to that, or answer to that question, but I'm getting fired up. Sorry.
Thanks,
we
moderator.
We need more housing stock.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Our next question is from Caroline. Has youth homelessness increased over the past few years, or is it steady? If it has changed, either way, what do you feel are the key contributors, sorry?
I don't think youth homelessness has been on the rise, but I think in the last year, we've had two very diverse things happen. One, Kelly and her team have done an amazing, and our team at the portal and also some other agencies have done an amazing job of making things different. So like we've housed, I don't even always keep up with the numbers. I didn't know we now have 20 youth in apartments and then so many in host homes. That side's been amazing. So youth homelessness isn't on the rise, but getting out of it is more challenging today than ever because there's simply no place to go. And so I think the awareness of youth homelessness has also increased, but the kid that's feeling shame is still not able to access stuff easily and quickly. Do you know what I mean? Like, every guidance counselor knows about what we do. Every guidance counselor, you know, is well connected and things like that. And it's usually them that knows, or social workers and things like that. But it's the youth that still feels shame and is disconnected from community. And when there's no places to go, simply because if you have money, like for people that have money, there's not even a place to go. But if you have money and you got a good reference, you're going to get that place quicker than somebody that doesn't. And so both things have been happening simultaneously. So I think there's less youth out in the cold. There's less youth in vulnerable positions. But we've only been dealing with the tip of the iceberg because the kids that aren't connected and aren't coming forward are still going unnoticed. So it's hard to answer that question, but you can see some of those different factors.
Oh, no more questions. Okay. Let's do...
Can I add one piece
Yeah.
to that in terms of what is, you know, one of the reasons for homelessness? And I'm going to link it to the question back there about what can be done. If you are hosting an event, or you're at an event, or if you're downtown at a coffee shop, or if you are at the theater or you're at the movie theaters and you don't see youth, it's because people haven't worked to make that a youth-friendly space. And we need to do that. We're just not doing that. We feel more comfortable when we don't see youth in our spaces for whatever reason. They're terrifying. I get it. I have a preteen. That's scary enough. But it's a thing. Like when you have a street fest in Wolfville, how many youth are actually out there? When we host Apple Blossom, like where are all of the youth? It's really interesting. One quick anecdote linked to COVID, because COVID offered so many teachings. When community sport had shut down essentially, and there wasn't any offerings other than a few smatterings here and there, we were still mowing the fields in Kentville and the ball fields. And I couldn't get anybody on them other than parents and their kids, and they'd fly a kite or they'd roll around and they'd kick around a soccer field. But nobody. I was paying staff to look after these facilities, and then I looked over at the skate park, and we had issues with how many youth were at the skate park. There were so many, and there's no rules around skate parks because it's, you know, not linked to any traditional sport. But when we went in and had conversations with them, that's where they felt safe. It wasn't across the street on the soccer fields because they weren't involved in organized sport, and so they didn't feel welcome there. But the skate park is where they felt welcome. That's their ownership. They helped design it. They understood the law of skateboarding. They saw themselves there in that space. And it became this really big conversation around who are we catering our public tax dollars to? Yeah, it was just a really big piece. So if we're working hard to ensure that youth have, that we have access to our youth and we understand them, then we have to create spaces where they feel welcome.
Can you just repeat? I'll repeat the question just so the people at home can hear what the question was. If I'm getting it right, she's hearing that you're frustrated or talking about the lack of access to recreation programs. Is there a vision for changing that, what that looks like? Does it look like offering all organized sports for free? What is kind of the answer? Is that the question? Did I get it? Okay.
If I appear frustrated, I am. If you want to join my movement, join me. That's a really interesting question, actually. So within Nova Scotia, you have two bodies. One is Sport Nova Scotia, one is Recreation Nova Scotia. I'm obviously affiliated quite closely with Recreation Nova Scotia, and I can tell you that organization has worked really hard to take a look at accessibility. In fact, one of the pillars of the national and provincial strategy for recreation is access and inclusion. We all define that differently. In this case, we're talking about youth, but largely it's broadly speaking. But we can't do that or have any movement unless there is a political will to do that. I'm just gonna say that. Back in '74, when the national statement was created around recreation is a human right, this is what you need in order to thrive as a community, that's when the federal government was actually funding community recreation and public recreation. And then I think somewhere in the 80s, somebody got a good idea that that shouldn't happen and it should fall solely on the backs of municipalities. And then the pay-to-play model was created. It may have been in the 90s. 90s was bad hair, was everything. But yeah, that's when the pay-to-play model was introduced. And you know, I don't know, it's a larger conversation, but I think the short answer is no. I think that a lot of the efforts that go towards, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this, but a lot of the efforts that we put into access is creating access to systems that aren't working, and I've already said it before, whether that's creating access for folks with mobility issues into communities that have been designed by people who don't have mobility issues, whether it's creating access to opportunities that are designed for folks who have means, and then I spend my career trying to ensure that folks who don't have means have access to them. I don't see that changing in the immediate future. I wish I had better news. I don't. But you know, within my field, we talk a lot about how do we ensure everybody has access to a system that we don't see changing.
The interim thing, I went and spoke to Valley Recreation because Rachel invited me, and I was listening to...
I had him on speed dial.
And I was, yeah. And when I was listening to every single minute, like village, town, and county, their report on recreation, every one of them said our recreation, like they gave examples of what was free and what was accessible. And I was sitting there and I went, why am I here? And then as I was listening a bit more, I said, you know what, guys? I stood up and it was my turn to talk. I said, I'm going to set some of aside what I was going to talk about because I said, you're very willing, you've got affordable stuff. But I said, I think there's a disconnect. The people like Laura Lee that work with the people that are struggling and feel disconnected because she's a social worker doesn't know about all your free stuff. But also the people that need to come into your facilities or participate in your programs are scared out of their minds about going there. I said, someone that's struggling with poverty in Wolfville doesn't go to the Acadia Athletic Building unless someone takes them. So that same summer, we had a gal from the Acadia, she was a basketball player and she was actually the captain of the basketball team. She collected all these kids every week and she took them into the athletic complex and she took them swimming. And I said, I never saw the budget item for that. She goes, oh, they never paid. I always just took them everywhere. But the thing is, she made it familiar to them. She also took those same kids at the town hall, and then the kids started coming in and bugging Rachel in her office. But what changed was these kids had somebody that took them and accompanied them to the athletic building, to the town office, and things like that. And so that's what struck me when I was with all the recreation people. I said, you've got the free stuff. They know the people that need the free stuff, but we don't have enough people in between that are bringing those people to those free stuff.
And again, it's more than this. I could go on and on about this. You're going to get me going, but it's again more than this idea of free, because that has its own stigma. But you know, right. There's this like a lens of equity when you do all of these things. But here's an example to what Russ was saying. So
we'll do 2 more minutes, and then we probably need to get into the calls to action.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our former bylaw enforcement officer, who, if you want to know what's going on in town, talk to your bylaw enforcement officer. Am I right? Because they're on the street and they know. So they'd keep an eye on some of the youth for me. And I gave them a stack of cards to go to the arena. So here's a free pass to go to the arena. We have skates you can borrow. We have helmets you can borrow. The Kentville Arena is right downtown, which is where most people were. So it's, transportation is an issue. They just walk over. And he would hand them out to whomever was around and needed a place to go. There's washrooms in there. There's some great stuff. And because I'm nosy, I put a little mark on them so that I would know when they were used. How many do you think got used? 0. Not a single one got used. All of those barriers we talk about, except for this feeling that I belong there. They don't feel, in this case, they didn't feel like they belonged at this arena downtown where they see people going in there with their hockey bags. They know the rules. They know that, Rolly's at the front door and he's really big and hairy, but he's actually a really nice guy. Yeah, so having that connection is really, really key.
And I think it goes, again, back to what we value as a society. And I'll be up front, I have 2 varsity athlete daughters, so I was part of the system. But what we value in sport versus recreation, which I just learned from Rachel last week, and organized sport we value as a society. And the better you are at it, the more we value. And we'll give you money to go to school, and please come to us. But if you're in host league hockey, well, you're a bit of a failure. You have to be in rep hockey. So again, what we value and who we elevate in our society, and that gives those kids that feeling of, should I be there, should I not? I'm not good enough.
Awesome, thank you. All right, let's do some calls to action, the nitty-gritty. What are you gonna do about it? Well, Russ is so good at coming up with these little mantras. So be, build, and belong is kind of our mantra for the evening. So be a good neighbor, build homes, and belong, create safe spaces. And so we have specific action items for each of these categories. Be a good neighbor is specifically trying to help really have this peer-based mental health model, essentially. So the system can be hard to access at times. Not every time the system does need to be accessed, but if we're not in the system and we can't change the system, what can we do collectively to still help people that are struggling? So be a big brother and big sister is a really big one. We know if somebody's experienced adverse childhood events, that if they have just one steady, healthy adult in their life, there's resiliency there, like you talked about. And so we also know that there's at least a 40-person wait list right now. There are so many littles that need bigs and not enough bigs. So if you have a couple hours a week to spare, sign up to be a big brother, big sister. Being a mentor in somebody's life gives them that social connection, that person to take them into all of these community spaces and get them more deeply rooted in the community. So you can go do that. Very, very tangible, very practical. Yeah. Help create community safe spaces. So we actually are going to have another follow-up discussion, if you're interested, on creating safe spaces. So the kind of vision for this is that every community would have an indoor community space that could be used from an intergenerational perspective. And so we're kind of going to vision about what that could look like. Are there spaces already in the community that could be used? Who can run that? The portal certainly can't take on all of that, and neither can one individual rec department take on all of that. But if we work together as a community, we could probably get a really nice indoor community center going, essentially. And I mean, think like ping pong tables and things. Like a youth who is really kind of active in their mental illness is not necessarily going to be able to sit down in front of a counselor in a room and do counseling. But I can tell you, last week, somebody wandered in and I said, hey, do you want to play ping pong? We set up this little rickety ping pong thing with broken paddles, and he told me all of his traumas for an hour and a half. And so there's this tangible thing that happens when it's not so serious. And it was simply just about a safe space and having some, not even, like it was broken equipment. I'm not even kidding. So we don't need to like shoot for the stars here. We can just make something adequate and it will be helpful.
The last couple things are get familiar. I think one of the things that, there's stigma against youth, there is stigma against mental illness. Lucas's story is quite extreme. Like, the experience of schizophrenia is can be really scary. And if you've never seen somebody with active symptoms of schizophrenia, that can also be scary. They're saying things out of nowhere, like he's probably talking about how he's the Antichrist to a bunch of random strangers. And as a stranger, you're like, what the heck's happening? And this is really scary too. But if you have a little bit of an education and an understanding about what might be happening for that person, and also the understanding that this doesn't necessarily make them a dangerous person, then it's a little bit easier to tolerate, a little bit easier to understand, and a little bit easier to help. So you can
Kelly, just a quick comment. Keeping in mind, Glenn gave the percentage. It's a small percentage of the population.
Yeah.
But when we don't have kids connected in recreation and we have them disconnected in community, they can develop mental illness-like symptoms because of their trauma and their stress,
Totally.
which doesn't mean they have schizophrenia, but there's lots of stuff going on.
Yeah. So mental health first aid, you can take that online, and it gives you a pretty general overview. And so I would recommend just educate yourself, and that can go a long way. The other thing is ASSIST, which is Applied Suicidal Intervention Skills Training. You can also take that online. Personally, I feel like this is one of the most beneficial courses you can take because, again, it's reducing the stigma around somebody that's experiencing suicidal ideation. A lot of times you actually, in the end, don't need to call the police or need to go to the hospital because it's really about asking the right questions, listening well, and you can de-escalate a lot of situations. You don't need necessarily a medical professional to do that. You can equip yourself to be able to do that in the community. And the more people in the community are safe people to talk to about things like suicidal ideation, that stigma also goes down. If everybody knows that we can talk about suicidal ideation and not get totally freaked out about it, then people are more likely to talk about it when it's happening, and then you can intervene a lot quicker. So yeah, get ASSIST training. It's awesome. The next section is build homes. So as I ranted about, we need more housing stock. And so one way you can do that without actually creating another home is to be part of the host home program like Russ talked about. You can go to our website. There's an application online. Our lovely staff, Amanda, is our host home coordinator. And we always need more host homes. So not every youth is a good fit for a host home. We're screening for if they're ready for that kind of environment. But the more host homes we have in more locations also gives youth more choice. So when we're going to a meet and greet with a host home, if they're saying, you know what, I don't feel comfortable here, we have another option. Okay, well, let's go see this other host home. Now they have choice. Now they have buy-in. All of those things make hosting a lot easier. And also location. Sometimes they need to be out of a certain area for safety reasons, so we need to move into a whole nother area. And so the more the merrier. Support coordinated access. So I don't know if we fully got into what coordinated access is, so I'll explain it just a little bit. So my role as the housing locator is to try and find and work with landlords so that individuals who are experiencing barriers to accessing the rental market can get into the rental market and get units. However, what happens is when there's a high number of people who are experiencing homelessness and a low amount of vacancies, what's happening right now is all of these different individuals are working with various different service agencies. So we have us calling, we have different social workers calling, and there's this list of landlords basically in the valley. All those landlords are getting all sorts of calls from all different social service agencies. And so what we're trying to do is bring it together so that if somebody's in need of housing, there's one intake with the same assessment every time it goes into the system. And then when there's a vacancy, the system will help us figure out who is at the highest risk, because really we should be housing the highest risk first. And what supports do they need to be successful. And then basically it's using what stock we have in the most efficient way. So if you want to be part of coordinated access, if you're a social service worker who is often looking for housing for people or needing that resource, we have a stakeholders meeting on April 8th from 1 to 3. You can send me an email and we'll get you in there. We also have landlords coming to that
that meeting as well, so that they can be part of that system. And together as a community at that meeting, we'll come up with who do we think should have the highest priority access. So it's a real collaborative approach. And it's actually really hard decisions when everybody needs access, but we'll be coming up with a triage system. The next one is join the landlord partnership program. So like I said, we're already working with a lot of landlords. We always need more landlords to work with. Even if you don't have a vacancy right now, I would love to talk to you about if the possibility that your unit does open up. And we kind of just go through our memorandum of understanding that are we taking the lease as a master lease, and then we're able to put somebody in there kind of at our discretion, or do you want to meet everybody ahead of time, or is it a co-sign situation? There's tons of ways to partner, but kind of what we're saying is our part that we're bringing to it is the support piece. We will have somebody in that unit that is connected to some sort of support, that there will be in-unit visits, and so that's kind of our agreement. And the last one, which is the project I'm working on now that is taking up a lot of time and I'm really passionate about it, is the accessory dwelling unit project. So the quickest way and a lot of best practice when you have a housing crisis and we're like literally hemorrhaging is to put up units as quickly as possible. And the only really way to do that right now, especially when we have issues with lumber shortages and labor shortages, is prefab homes. And there's a company right now in Halifax that are making, this is the kind of a sketch they did, but they're 1-bedroom accessible units, prefab. So once they get the order, after the pads are laid or whatever, it's about a 3-week turnaround. And so if there's the will and there's the funding, there's actually a huge capacity to get units up quickly. The nice things about these are if you have a senior who can't leave their home because they have nowhere to go that's accessible, which is a huge problem right now. They can live in the backyard and have a family move in. And so you're freeing up housing stock for families, and you're having somebody in safe housing that's accessible, which is also meeting their needs. So a few things that you can do if you already have land that is zoned for a detached secondary dwelling, go for it. And you can talk to us also because we can put together kind of a proposal to do a group of these and hopefully get some funding if you're agreeing that it will be for a low-income individual. The other thing is we're going to actually be going to some councils and recommending some changes to their zoning bylaws to allow detached secondary suites because the majority of housing across the valley is single-family dwelling units. They're not necessarily apartment buildings or things that are zoned for multiple dwellings, but if we're going to be serious about solving the housing crisis, we need to start shifting, and we need to change some of the systems. So this is something that I'm committing to, really seeing if we can get some of the zoning changed. And Kentville is already zoned for these. So if you're in Kentville, you don't have to do any of that bylaw change. You're already good to go. If you're in other communities, I have really short infographics for which, like if you're in Berwick, for example, I have a printout of what's allowed in your area and what's not allowed, so you can also ask me about that. Next.
Is that stuff we could also put on a website? People could just go to?
Yeah, there's links. Because it's so specific to the community, because the county is one thing and then the municipality is a different thing, and so it's a lot of information. So it's probably easier if you email me and say, hey, I live in this area, I'm requesting information, and then I can email you that. But there are links already on the Homeless No More website that says, if you're interested in this, click here, and it'll automatically send an email to me. Okay, I think I'm going on and on now. Okay, last one, belong. So create safe spaces. One awesome thing that Portal did, actually Leslie, she's our staff, she's awesome. She's come up with a programming toolkit. So one way to help people feel like they belong is to design programming that meets their needs. One of these is the prevention programming toolkit. So if you're going to run summer programming, if you're going to run any sort of sports programming or anything like that, we have a whole toolkit. It breaks a lot of things down. You can download it for free on the Portal website and the Homeless No More website. So access that. And we are going to have a follow-up workshop around creating safe spaces. So what do these community spaces look like? Where could we put them? Who wants to be involved? Do you want to volunteer to take a few hours an evening each week to kind of monitor the space? So we're really going to do some visioning around that. And these are just some of the values that we want to be in all of these spaces. And I think that's it. One more slide. Oh, these are all the links. So we'll get this slides out to everybody who registered. In your packages, everybody got a physical package who's here. All of these dates are in there. The links are in there. So just check out your green packages you have, and there will also be a giant PDF sent to anybody who's online with all of this information. I do want to draw your attention. There's community health boards have also been trying to advocate for their kind of pillars. Housing and recreation just happen to be one of those pillars as well. So there's a little kind of blurb if you want to write a note to your municipality around housing or about recreation. There's the postcards from the community health boards and some templates you can use. So you can check those out as well. And yeah. We have a lot of people to thank. You can read them all there. We definitely have lots of funders, lots of personal supporters, and a thank you to our panelists for joining us today and everybody who came out. I think we had 200 people register online. This will be recorded, or it has been recorded, so we'll be able to send that out online. If somebody wasn't able to be here or watch tonight, I would encourage you to have them share it. It'll be on YouTube, and the more people that are involved in this, the more likely we are to change the community for the better. So, those are all your funders. Thank you.